When I travel abroad, particularly to Europe, and a local person tells me, "Oh, I love Indian food," I normally like to have a little bit of fun, and I tell them, "Oh, that's lovely. I also love European food." And they're usually slightly confused and they ask me, "What do you mean European food?" French food is nothing like Italian or Polish food, and English food is not even food. And I'll tell them, "Good point, because the term Indian food is no different. The food of Tamil Nadu is very different from the food of Bengal and the northeastern states. And the northeastern states have a distinct and unique cuisine in comparison to, say, Kashmir." But it got me thinking about, is there something common about the food of the Indian subcontinent? And I'm including Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, that makes it uniquely Indian. When I was writing Masala Lab, I needed to deeply understand different regional Indian cuisines. So, being a software guy, I wrote some Python code to scrape and download recipes from the internet and did some analytics on them to find ingredient and cooking technique patterns that define, say, Bengali or Gujarati cooking. And in that process, I realized that there was indeed one cooking technique that defines Indian cooking, and that is Tadka. Tadka or chhhk in Hindi Urdu, Talip in Tamil, Bagar in Bengali, Fodni in Marathi, Oggarane in Kannada, and tempering in English, in my opinion, defines the Indian in Indian food because the act of heating oil and adding spices to it, both at the start of a dish and at the end of a dish, defines the fundamental flavor profile of any dish in this part of the world. Let's take the simplest dal. Pressure cook dal, add salt, and then if you heat mustard oil, add mustard, fenugreek, fennel, sauf, nigella, and celery seeds and add it to the dal, it becomes Bengali. You take the same dal and heat coconut oil, add red chilies, curry leaves, garlic, cumin, and mustard, it becomes Kerala food. Before you add the tadka, the dish is bland. It has no identity. Once you add the tadka, it becomes Maharashtrian or Rajasthani or Odia. The Hindi saying tadka marna is often used in corporate settings to take a plain looking PowerPoint and make it tell a better story. The tadka quite literally gives the dish its central identity. So let's dig into the science of tadka. Almost every dish in this part of the world starts with the dramatic ritual of heating oil and adding spices to it. That satisfying crackle of mustard seeds, the golden brown transformation of cumin, and that incredible aroma that immediately signals to not just the people in the house, but even neighbors what and who is cooking. When you think about it, our grandmothers were doing some serious molecular gastronomy way before it became cool in fancy restaurants. Spices are essentially plant parts that evolved specifically to prevent animals, insects, and microbes from eating them. Think about it. The plant takes a lot of effort turning sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into food, and animals just walk up and munch on them. And since plants can't move, they decided that their only defense was chemical weapons. You can watch my video that explains how spices work. They're chemical weapons that plants developed over millions of years. Cumin developed cuminaldehyde. Mustard developed allyl isothiocyanate that is so volatile that it's why when you eat something with a lot of mustard, it goes and irritates your nose. And chilies developed capsaicin that tricks your brain into thinking that your mouth is on fire, unless you're a bird, in which case the plant wants you to eat the chili and deposit its seeds somewhere else. Back to the kitchen. Over thousands of years, Indians have figured out that while these defensive chemicals are harmful to insects and taste really bad to animals that eat them raw, we can use heat to transform them into something incredibly delicious. And that's exactly what tadka does. Let's break down this into some simple science. The first high school concept I want you to recall is the concept of solubility. Most of the incredible flavors in our spices are fat-soluble, not water-soluble. This means that if you just throw some jeera into your dal, you're not getting even 10% of its potential flavor. These flavor molecules are like those awkward cousins wearing sherwanis at family weddings. They're usually standing around in the sidelines hoping that no one notices them. And hot oil is like that one friend who pulls them into the dance. And then all of a sudden, those shy fellows become completely new people. When you heat oil to around 170 Celsius, that's the sweet spot just before it starts smoking, and add spices to it, you are creating the perfect environment for these flavor molecules to break free from their cellular prisons and dissolve into the oil. Take mustard seeds, for example. When they hit hot oil, they pop, and they do that because a tiny amount of moisture is trapped inside the mustard, and as heat increases, that moisture turns into steam, and steam expands, putting pressure on the seed, which pops. The same principle as popcorn. But quite interestingly, while every region of India uses a different mix of spices to define the flavor of their region, mustard is surprisingly common across a lot of them. And after some conversation with several good cooks for my book, I came up with a theory for why mustard always seems to go in first. Turns out, for tadka, temperature is crucial. Your oil needs to be between 165 and 180 Celsius for optimal flavor extraction. Below that, you're just making warm spices. Above that, you're making charcoal. And our grandmothers and their grandmothers figured out that the temperature at which mustard starts popping is roughly in the range we want. So they use mustard as a thermometer. A small amount of mustard seeds don't really add mustard's pungent flavor. After the mustard, it gets really interesting. Remember our old friend, the Maillard reaction? You can watch my video on that. The same reaction that makes your onions deliciously brown also works on spices. When you let cumin seeds turn that perfect dark brown color in hot oil, you're not just releasing their existing flavors, you're creating entirely new flavor compounds. Now, let's talk about the oil itself. Every region in India has its preferred oil for tadka. Coconut oil in Kerala, mustard oil in Bengal, ghee in Punjab, cottonseed oil in Vidarbha, sesame oil in Tamil Nadu, groundnut oil in Andhra, and even animal fat in various parts of India. Here are some of the most common tadka mistakes people tend to make. Adding spices to oil that's not hot enough is like trying to swim in a frozen lake. Nothing happens. But add them to oil that's too hot and you will mostly just get really bitter flavors. The sweet spot is when the oil is hot enough that a single mustard seed pops within 3 to 4 seconds of adding it. There's also a specific sequence to follow. Remember, we're dealing with different melting points, different rates of flavor release, and different levels of heat sensitivity. You start with the hardy whole spices, mustard, cumin, then go on to the more delicate, expensive ones. And if you're using powdered spices, they go in last or you'll have a bitter mess on your hands. Now, here's where you can get creative. A tadka is not just for dal. You can use it to transform any dish. Add it to raita, and you've got a layer of warm, toasted spice flavors contrasting with cool dahi. Pour it over rice, and those fat-soluble flavor molecules will coat every grain. Even a simple cup of buttermilk becomes extraordinary with a well-made tadka. Let's do a quick experiment. Take 2 bowls of dal. In one, add your spices directly. In the other, add the same spices via tadka. Taste them side by side. The difference is not just subtle, it's like comparing a phone speaker to a concert hall. Some studies suggest that cooking spices in oil actually increases the bioavailability of their beneficial compounds. Turmeric's curcumin, for example, is better absorbed by your body when it's combined with oil and black pepper, something our ancestors figured out centuries ago. Different regions of India have their own tadka signatures. The Bengali panchforan is 5 whole spices hitting hot mustard oil together. Kerala tadkas often start with curry leaves and mustard seeds in coconut oil. Up north, jeera and hing in ghee are more common. Each combination is a time-tested flavor bomb. You don't need fancy equipment for a good tadka. just a small pan, what we call a tadka pan, good quality spices, and some patience. But here's a pro tip: keep a lid handy. Some spices can pop quite enthusiastically, and while it's fun to dodge mustard seed projectiles, if you miss, they hit and they will burn you. Here's my go to test for a perfect tadka: the sound test. When mustard seeds hit the oil, they should pop within seconds. Cumin seeds should sizzle and turn golden brown, not dark brown. Curry leaves should crisp up almost instantly. Get these basic indicators right, and you're well on your way to tadka mastery. Remember, tadka is not just a cooking technique. It's edible chemistry. It's about understanding how heat, fat, and spices interact to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Feel free to experiment with different combinations of oils and spices, but please don't walk away from your tadka. Those few seconds between perfect and burned can feel like paying to watch a thriller movie, but taking a restroom break at the wrong time. And to think beyond just Indian food, here is Ayushi Gupta Mehra, an agricultural economist who runs the page The Foodie Dairies, demonstrating how you can use the science of tadka in creative new ways. 1. You can pour hot oil on chilies, garlic, and spices and make yourself chili oil. You can store this and pour it on any dish, and it will immediately magically improve it. Think of this as cold tadka. 2. You can also add peanut butter or gochujang paste to this tadka and mix in noodles. 3. You can add chili flakes to hot butter and pour it over eggs. 4. Actually, you can also improve bland pastas with a tadka. The Italians will get annoyed, but annoyed Italians are amusing to watch. So try it. And as I was researching the science of tadka or chhhk for this video, I found out that someone was writing a book named Chhhk. And when I read that insightful book, I felt that I had to invite this person to my channel to speak about his book. I'd like you to welcome Abhijit Bannerjee, author of Chhhk on food, economics, and society. And Nobel Prize winner for economics in 2019. The book is illustrated by Cheyenne Olivier and is a collection of insightful essays about Indian food, culture, and society. It's an absolute pleasure having you on my YouTube channel, Abhijit. As I was writing the script for a video about the science of tadka or chhhk, it struck me that as central as the technique is to defining the identity of any regional cuisine in India, the metaphor of chhhk or tadka being an attractive surface layer that hides problems underneath struck me. And then as I read your book, I thought I must absolutely cover not just the science of how flavor molecules are extracted from spices using hot oil, but also explore deeper issues about the intersection of Indian food, society, economics, and culture. So my first question is, my mother had 3 boys, worked a full-time job in Canara Bank, and cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner from scratch all her working life. As children, we just took it for granted. You start the book with a tribute to your mother and her views on women's labor force participation in India. How has food culture, particularly the expectation of women cooking elaborate meals 3 times a day, affected women's economic opportunities in South Asia?
When I was growing up, it was not 3 square meals a day, it was 5 square meals a day for in a Bengali household, which sounds dangerously excessive and maybe just designed to keep women busy. But what was worse is, in my household, for example, in our household, we had a cook, and so cooking could be done by someone, but the planning, the thinking about what it is that defines today's menu, that was, and who's going to do the shopping, when will things show up, all of that was still my mother's job. And in that fundamental sense, I think haven't changed. I think the point that we make a little bit in chhhk is that I think in women's labor, in that sense of the word, in the sense of being mindful of everything, is really something that I think hangs over them and makes them, the fact that they have to keep all the balls in the air, that's what keeps them mentally busy. And even if they have a job, that makes it harder to excel, harder to become really successful at it.
Throughout the book, you challenge traditional economic assumptions about how people make choices. Could you talk about why the standard economic model of rational preferences falls short when it comes to understanding food habits?
What the standard model of economic rationality really does is to do violence to the economics. It's a model somehow we think which hierarchizes, I think, survival, which might seem, evolutionarily right, but makes very little economic sense. It's survival in a very biological sense of, we should spend the money to maximize nutrition, and maybe then procreation or whatever, but not making life worth living, giving us energy to be creative. And for those things, pleasure has to have a space, and it doesn't give us space for pleasure. It doesn't allow for the possibility that it might be rational for someone to eat, maybe very badly or inadequately for several days in order to have a big party, which gives them so much joy that it allows them to carry on.
You write about how Indian joint families are breaking down and elderly people are increasingly living alone. How is this changing not just what people eat, but the very fabric of Indian society?
The joint family, it makes, of course, everything different and many things better. There was lots of conflict, and many people in the joint family were the bearers of that. But I think as something that, as a way for elderly people to have a space, I think that space has shrunk in people's lives. People are very busy. They have a social life which doesn't include the family. Those are not necessarily bad things, but it means that for the elderly, there is a need to find a different way of being. It is not living through your children, but living through your friends. And especially a lot of women, once they get married, they stop having friends. And that needs to change. People need to have friends and acquaintances and people who they can stop in the street and talk to, and just to give them their life some kind of meaning and structure.
You discuss the complex relationship between economics and culture through examples like the evolution of Chinese food in India. How do you see globalization changing Indian food culture? And what does this tell us about economic development?
My wife was in Moscow when the Soviet state collapsed, and suddenly there was change. And in those days, apparently McDonald's was a very exciting destination for for young people to go to in Moscow, and that was I think reflects a very kind of a key truth about globalization, which is that it provides a kind of there's a language, a visible language of globalization. When you see America, you see Kentucky Fried Chicken, you see Dunkin' Donuts, you see McDonald's. And the exploration is therefore based on, visibility rather than in terms of quality. The people don't actually, when I think the same person who would be very picky about the sambar, is often much less picky about the kind of pizza they will eat or serve at home.
Despite being a Nobel laureate in economics, you write that you'd never start a restaurant. What does running a restaurant teach us about the limitations of standard economic theories about incentives and management?
I said in Chalk that I wouldn't ever want to start a restaurant, and that's the truth. I would be horrible at it. And and it's really, the point I was trying to make is it's not about being either keen on cooking, which I am, or reasonably good at it, which maybe also I am, but really about being extremely attentive to many details, and which I am attentive to certain details, but most other details escape me. And I think I would be a lousy manager for a restaurant, which is a kind of business which requires absolutely minute attention to 100 details, and 100 things do go wrong. during the day, and you really need to think about how to manage them. And it's just not the kind of job I can do. And I think in the economics there is this, I think, enormous emphasis on kind of the innovative talent, the great genius who comes and transforms everything. And I think that a restaurant fundamentally is about being somebody who may not be a great genius, but is really very good at getting the job done. And I think we often ignore that at our peril.
You discuss climate change's impact on Indian street food culture and social interactions. What role do you see economics playing in helping societies adapt to these changes while preserving imported food traditions?
It does have a very useful role to play in adjusting to various environmental constraints, climate change being the most frightening one of those. And it comes from the fact that things need to be priced right, otherwise they get wasted often. For example, farm water in Punjab is overused. Rice is grown where rice should not be grown, and that's bad for Punjab even in the long run. And people don't grow bajra or jowar because rice gets the price support and jowar and bajra don't. And I think getting these basic things doesn't fix all the problems. It won't fix some of the problems that will be caused by Mr. Trump's America, but it will solve some of the problems, and we might as well do what we can.
My last question: what is your favorite chhk recipe?
The chhk, as you know, the ideal chhk depends on what you're cooking. But for a lot of vegetable dishes, I love the Bengali chhk of chili and kalonji, typically in mustard oil, but not always, and sometimes with garlic added. And that can be a wonderful chhk for vegetables, eggplant, for dal, for cauliflower. So it's really sometimes with fennel added to the kalonji, and not the garlic, and so on. But this is the range of chhk that I really love.
So please go buy the book and add more Tadka to your life.
Explaining the science of food and debunking pseudoscience is hard work. So I request you to consider becoming a member of this channel. Members get to be part of a private group that will work together to dig into the science of food in far more detail and also discover the true joy of food.